Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on FinOps Hubs, gaining cost observability across every cloud you run. If you're wondering why you're here, these are the topics that we're going to cover as a part of this webinar here today. Number one, as always, I'd like to start off with a round of introductions so you know who I am. We're going to get right into it from there. We're going to talk about what FinOps is, what FinOps Hubs are, what comes after you do a hub deployment, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps and how Netrix can help you with your FinOps journey as an organization. In today's session, you've got me and myself alone. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Tom Lilly, Field CTO for Cloud Solutions here at Netrix. I sit in a team here that is called our Office of the CTO. Our primary focus is to assist our clients in mapping business issues to technical solutions. So whether that is things like observability in the cloud from a costing perspective or performance, or just figuring out how you can migrate into Azure, we can help there as well. Those are the kind of conversations that I'm having with my customers on a pretty regular basis, especially considering the state of hardware at the time of this webinar that I'm sure you all are aware of. With that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about FinOps. Now, most organizations that I'm talking to that have some sort of cloud presence or are looking to move into the cloud are aware of FinOps. But for those of you that aren't, I wanted to at least level set in talking about what it is. Most of you are probably familiar with other operational monikers such as DevOps or DevSecOps or SecOps and things like that. And really, FinOps follows the same sort of principle. And what it's really meant to do is operationalize the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month financial reporting and operations of your teams. And really, where we always like to start is that FinOps isn't it's not the responsibility of one person. It's not the responsibility of one team. It's really meant to be a cross-functional discipline that brings a lot of people from your organization together to ensure that your costs in the cloud are being optimized and being tracked properly. We're going to get a little bit into roles and responsibilities here later, but engineering, finance, leadership, you've got architecture, you've got your data visualization teams. All of these individuals and all these teams play a role in FinOps and making sure that as you establish some sort of FinOps procedures and processes in your organization that you are successful, and that we want you to ensure that everybody has a say that has that stake in your cloud environments and making sure that everything runs appropriately. The other thing to keep in mind is that FinOps is meant to be continuous and not reactive. So just like DevOps, there's a huge emphasis on continuous integration and continuous deployment, CI/CD. We have the same thing from a FinOps perspective. The goal is that the procedures and the tools that we're going to introduce today get brought into a regular basis, that from a daily perspective, you're looking at dashboards or you're reviewing exports or you're making changes and updates with your data services team, things like that. But the goal isn't that, oh no, I got a bill this month and now I have to go back and check my dashboards and see what that breakdown was or where my anomalies were or stuff like that. The goal really is that FinOps becomes part of that day-to-day operation, that you are looking at it on a regular basis, that you're interfacing with your leadership or your cloud center of excellence or whoever has the keys to the kingdom in this area, as well as your CFO or your other accounting teams to make sure that they know what's going on. That way you can ensure that there are no surprises at the end of the month or the beginning of the month when those bills come out and you get invoiced for something that you weren't expecting. And really what it comes down to is visibility. Making sure that you know what's happening, what's deployed, where it's deployed, how much it's costing you, what all those little sub meters add up to and why they're out there. Taking those real metrics, taking real, true, actionable and actual information and using those to drive action. It's not just guessing to say, well, we deployed this service last month, so we think that's what accounts for this increase in $500 per month in our Azure subscription. Or, oh, you know what, we onboarded 3 new customers and therefore this S3 storage is going to go up by probably $40 a month to account for additional storage or whatever. The goal here is that you get that visibility into the environment and you use that to drive your actions. That's either justification up the chain to make sure that people know why you're paying more for X, Y, and Z services, or it could even be resizing or right-sizing your environment. That maybe because you've grown so much, you can expand out because you've got more, revenue coming in for your services you're providing on the cloud. Maybe you do need to scale things in because they're just operating a lot higher than you budgeted for when you deployed things. Once again, the goal really is to ensure that you're using those metrics, that you're using actual, factual, hardened data to drive those decisions in your organization. Before we get too far into it as well, we also want to talk about a few things that we're going to be discussing throughout this webinar, just so you have an understanding of where we're coming from and why this becomes really important. And number one is probably one of the best things that's come out recently, and that's called FOCUS. So FOCUS is an acronym that stands for the FinOps Open Cost and Usage Specification. This is, as you can figure out by the name open in it, has been adopted by multiple different cloud providers, especially within Azure and AWS as the two primary hyperscalers out there. It is a cross-cloud costing and usage standard. So what this means is that as you get data exports and as you retrieve data using this standard, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at Azure or AWS or any other cloud that also supports FOCUS, it's all going to be in a similar format with a very similar schema, and it's all going to abide by that for the long term. Now, there are changes that do often happen to the FOCUS schema as additional abilities and additional visibility requirements come around. With that, there is a major minor versioning schema in FOCUS that you want to make sure you are having matched between your environments. You don't want to get FOCUS 1.1 data out of Azure and FOCUS 1.2 data out of AWS. That could potentially cause issues with your reports and with your just overall marrying of the data within those environments. So do make sure that you are keeping up with those new schemas. You've got some sort of change process in place as that FOCUS schema changes. Also important when you're configuring data exports to make sure that you're choosing the FOCUS standard and obviously the right schema version if your data exports give you that capability of choosing which one to do. Number two is probably the most visible KPI that we recommend for our customers, and that's what's called the ESR, or effective savings rate. The effective savings rate for an organization is pretty straightforward. It is, here is what list price is for everything that I have deployed across my clouds, and after things like reservations and savings plans and just general discounts from the manufacturer, what am I actually paying and what's that difference? So this gives you an actionable metric that you can track on a month-to-month or year-to-year basis that you can then report up to your accounting and finance teams to determine how well you are taking advantage of savings capabilities in the cloud. So if you need to justify the deployment of hubs, if you need to report on metrics to your, once again, your accounting team, your CCOE, things like that, the effective savings rate tends to be that longer term projection and longer term metric that we see our clients leveraging. If you see your effective savings rate go from 4% to 4.5% with a target of 6, you know that you're going in the right direction. If you see your effective savings rate go from 5% to 3%, then that could require some justification. Maybe you deploy a new service and you're not going to implement reservations before it's right sized. Maybe somebody got the keys to the kingdom and deployed something without telling you, and it doesn't have the appropriate configurations in place to make sure that it matches your standard when it comes to cost control. That effective savings rate does become very important to organizations as you need to justify and, once again, report these metrics back up to the powers that be. Number three is chargeback and showback. These are two sides of the same coin, and it all depends on how an organization like yours chooses to hold people accountable to what they deploy in the cloud. Showback is relatively straightforward. That is, given this GL code, given this team, given this project, given this owner, I'm going to go ahead and give them a visualization or an output to say, hey, this is what you cost me last month, last week, yesterday, for all of last year, whatever that ends up being. And they're just aware of it. They can track that. They can see as their team's usage of the cloud increases, the costs are also increasing. Maybe it's linear, maybe it's exponential, depending on the services. But at the end of the day, you're showing that individual, you're showing that team really what it costs to run in the cloud, which from versus being on premises is very different. A lot of my customers, as they run on premises, they don't know what their cost per core, or their cost per gigabyte of RAM, or cost per gigabyte of storage is, because they purchased all that hardware a while ago. That's a capital expenditure that has been amortized, or it's otherwise been forgotten about, and nobody knows what the actual per unit cost is. As we move into the cloud and that operational expenditure, you gain a lot more of that visibility, and being able to show somebody specifically how much this given application or how much this given SDLC environment is costing is extremely important and very valuable to ensure that you are being efficient as an organization with what you're spending. The other side to that is chargeback. So rather than just showing them and saying, hey, by the way, you're costing us $1,000 a month, you can actually allocate that to their P&L, to that specific GL code, to that individual, and have them justify it and put in purchase requests or things like that. We see a lot of that being available for our more mature organizations that have really adopted FinOps and visibility, but that doesn't mean that's not something that you can do or that you can't do yourself. It's a great way to make people sweat a little bit, which is obviously fantastic when it comes to making people actually ensure they're deploying what needs to be deployed and doing it properly for what it's worth. And then the last one that you'll hear a little bit about is anomaly detection. As you can expect, you may have certain spikes on a given day. For us internally, we have certain services that only bill one day for the month for the previous month's usage. So we do see anomalies at the end of the month. By looking at FinOps dashboards, you can look at what these anomalies are. You can see what a given change day over day is, or even if you want to get more granular, hour over hour, as you're sort of digging into these dashboards. Now, anomaly detection is great, especially if you have any sort of public-facing services. So, for example, if you have a website, for example, that all of a sudden you're hitting the busy season, and now your instances are scaled from 1 to 100 to accommodate that additional user load. That is an anomaly. That's something that is not planned for, or maybe it is, who knows. But compared to that same period last month, or once again last week, whatever that is, you are seeing an increase in costs. Doesn't mean that it's bad. Doesn't mean that those costs are malicious. It doesn't mean that it's not justified, but it is an anomaly. And for a lot of instances, those do need to be justified because people may not be recognizing them. They may not be planning for them. And at the end of the day, you want to make sure that as you're running through these services, that you know why we saw an increase in 300% in our web traffic for this given day. And then you can go back and say, like, oh, we had an ad campaign that ran and it drove traffic to the website. Or, hey, we had an outage of our CDN and more of our origins were getting hit than was expected, or things like that. At the end of the day, it's all about correlation. Let's talk a little bit about some of the principles as well. And we're going to group these, or we're going to pair them up because they really work together. The first two I'm going to pair up are the fact that teams collaborate on FinOps, but everybody owns their usage. So once again, you've got your engineering teams that make your changes. You've got your accounting teams that are monitoring the dashboards. You've got your CCOE. You've got your app owners, or your application teams. All of those teams will be working together, and they should be pulling in the same direction, rowing in the same direction to ensure that your FinOps practice is effective. However, at the end of the day, it still comes down to the individual. You've got those individual engineers that need to go ahead and size down resources, or they need to deploy new resources. You've got your CFO who needs to, potentially approve things. You've got your individual application owners that, they need to go ahead and justify why this application costs $1,400 a month when it was projected to be $800, things like that. It really drives accountability back to your owners and engineers and your architects and the people that really run your cloud environment. So with that, then that's really what we mean by everybody owns their usage, but the teams all collaborate in being successful. We also want to ensure that your variable cost model really informs your value-driven decisions. So once again, going back to your dashboards, making sure that you're reviewing them on a regular basis, that you're using the actual metrics and actual information to drive the decisions of your cloud environment, to size things up, size things down, retire certain SKUs and services, to implement new services. Maybe you've got extra room in the budget, and now you can go forward with an application modernization engagement because you do have that room, because you are under budget or things like that. That dovetails into that variable cost model because things will change on a regular basis. 1 month you could have 2 terabytes of bandwidth, and the next one you could have 10, depending on your end user usage, your customer usage, once again the deployment of new services, et cetera. So that becomes extremely important to validate that variable cost model and understanding how it's structured. Hey, is this service costed out on a per gigabyte basis? Is they per instance basis? Are my VMs or EC2s being costed out on a per second basis? Do I have reservations here to sort of flatten those variable costs out? All of those do become exceedingly important, and those two play really nicely together as you make those decisions and as your costs do vary from day to day, hour to hour, month to month. And then finally, you want to make sure that you have a centralized enablement strategy, which is where we get into FinOps Hubs, being that central service and being centralized reporting through services like Microsoft Fabric, and then ensuring that the data is delivered and is ingested in a timely manner into that centralized location, where that's using services like Azure Data Factory, where using pipelines in Microsoft Fabric. Making sure you have those exports configured properly, and making sure you've got the right pipelines and the right ETL or extract, transform, and load jobs to make sure the data hits your dashboards on a regular basis is also important. So once again, you've got things like your data team that owns the hubs, you've got your engineering teams that maybe own the other infrastructure, you've got your other subscription and account owners that may own your exports. All these become important as we get into this sort of shared responsibility and shared accountability model from a FinOps perspective. And one thing that I do also want to mention is that on this slide, items are represented linearly, but this is really a continuous process. It is meant to loop. It is meant to be iterative. That number one is you're going to inform. You're going to pull as much data as you can into your environment. You are going to get the visibility across as many clouds as you can, as many services as you can. All that information is going to then get centralized into that hub. You're going to define KPIs. What should our effective savings rate be? What are our budgets on a per application or per environment or per cloud basis, or even a per user basis, whatever that looks like? How does everything get allocated? What is my tagging strategy, which I'll talk about here in just a little bit. Once everything is sort of informed and centralized, and you've got the information that you need through dashboards and through other automations, that's where we get into optimization. So we want to go ahead and purchase reservations. We want to purchase savings plans. We want to scope them appropriately. We want to right-size workloads. We want to remediate any issues. Maybe we do have an open public IP or elastic IP on a service, and it just keeps getting hammered, which is causing a lot more bandwidth than is expected, and that's not supposed to be a thing that's out there. There are a lot of things that really get into the environment that you can optimize in terms of costing justification. I do want to take a little bit of an aside here and talk about why we use the term optimize here. A lot of times when we talk to our customers, their main focus when it comes to costing is they want to reduce costs. They want to get that number to be as low as possible. And I'm here to say that that's not always the right way to go. The lowest number is always 0. You can just go ahead and not use any services ever and not sell anything, and you're not going to make any money either. When we talk about cost optimization, especially a part of the well-architected framework, while we do generally have an eye toward minimizing costs where practicable, the optimization piece also means that there may be instances where costs need to go up. Maybe you need to deploy a new security strategy. Maybe you need to add edge firewalling. Maybe you need to increase the size in your database instances because they're running too slowly and it's causing customers to churn. There are certain situations where increasing your cost in the cloud is actually justified and can be easily overcome, from a budgeting perspective, and ensure that you are operating as an organization, you're doing right by your customers, that things like that are happening appropriately. So one thing that I don't want people to lose sight of is the fact that optimization is not just about reducing. It's really about justifying. It's really about making sure that things are sized appropriately to run your environment as it should be. And once again, that's something that you as an organization can define as you are going through that information phase. Once again, maybe your SLA for services needs to be 99.99%. Maybe your P95 for response time needs to be under 10 milliseconds or 5 milliseconds, or whatever that is. All of those things go forward to informing you and how you need to optimize the environment to make sure you're hitting those SLOs, or maybe you're hitting your standard deviations and things like that. And then finally, as we see here, it's operationalization. It's governing the environment. It's governing your FinOps hubs. It's charging and showing things back. It's enacting automation so that people get reports on a regular basis. Or maybe it's automating things like shutting down instances that aren't being used in lower environments. That operationalization piece is extremely important, because that's how you really get in. It's how you bring FinOps into your day-to-day sort of lives. It's how you become more proactive than reactive. That's really how you long-term right size and optimize the costs in your environment. And then once that's done, you start all over again. Maybe you onboard new cloud services. Maybe you establish new KPIs. Maybe you get more granular in how you are allocating your costs to your teams, or to your individuals, or to your applications. And then this process just keeps going over and over and over again. Once again, this is an operational process, so it is meant to be extremely iterative. For those of you that have established Cloud Centers of Excellence, or CCOEs, we do highly recommend that this process be iterated through every 1 to 2 months, maybe every quarter at the outset. That way you can ensure that everything is running and is being optimized. If you don't have a Cloud Center of Excellence, or you want help establishing one, reach out. I'm always like talking about people, or talking about things like that, for what it's worth. So let's dive a little bit more into Focus. So once again, Focus is our FinOps cost and usage standard. As mentioned before, the great thing about Focus is it's one language for cost data. Across your cloud providers, you're going to have consistent fields, consistent terminology in terms of billing rate, and number of units billed for a given time period, and things like that. You don't have to worry about doing heavy, ETL and data transformation to marry what comes out of AWS versus what comes out of Azure, because they're using two different standards, two different sets of terminology. Maybe they're exposing different fields and things like that. Really, that goal is to have that single unified schema, that single unified language across your multiple clouds for your costing data. Because that, it also allows you to more easily benchmark your environment, allows you to more easily allocate data across your environment, because it is apples to apples. You do know that, this per second billing, 1 second becomes the bill frequency, and that's 5/10 of a cent, and that becomes your billing rate. That becomes very easy to justify across the organization, because you're looking at it across, using the same terminology across multiple environments. And then once again, the goal is to have this be future-proofed, that as you're incorporating other clouds that also adopt the Focus standard, that they can plug in very easily into your hubs, that all of your pipelines, all of your data flows, all of your reports are just going to pick up on that data natively, because the fields and the schemas and everything else is going to be in the same format. So one of the things that I very often get asked by my customers as well is, well, this is all well and good, but we need to know who's responsible for what, because we have a lot of teams, we have a lot of cooks in the kitchen, we've got a lot of fingers in these pies. We really want to make sure that we've got accountability and we've got responsibility, whether it's as a formalized RACI or whether it's really just an internal business policy. So when we talk to our customers about stakeholders in FinOps, this is really how we break it out. Number one is engineering. They are the ones that are going to make changes in the environment. So as your operations and owners and things like individuals like that find things that need to be fixed, and as you go through the optimization process, your engineering teams are going to make those changes. They're going to be right-sizing instances. They're going to be shutting down public IPs. They're going to be, adjusting your IAM policies on, your S3 buckets. It really could, they are the boots on the ground. They're the people who are actually responsible for making these changes, and it's very important that they are empowered to do so. Whether you give them access to the dashboards or whether you just put in change requests based on your ITSM processes, make sure that your engineering teams are informed and they are responsible for making those changes. Your finance team, once again, budget forecasting, cost allocation, GL codes, all of that information should flow through your finance team, all the way up to and including your CFO or whoever wears the CFO hat for your organization. Make sure they know what the budgets are. Make sure that you are rolling up individual application, SDLC, and cloud budgets into a master IT budget. Make sure that they are aware of trending forecasts. Are you trending high? Are you trending low? Which team is responsible for that? All those become very important as, once again, we get into things like chargeback and showback, which once again is a lot of times pushed down by your finance teams. Your operations team, day to day, looking at dashboards, governing the environment, making recommendations, scanning for anomalies, making sure that everything is operating as expected. Your operations team is really who's going to be eyes on glass for the dashboards that do get deployed. Highly recommend that they get trained in it, that you have people that are certified in FinOps from the FinOps Foundation that are going to be running this on a regular basis. Your business owners, once again, we talked earlier about optimization. That's not just about the reduction in cost, it's the optimization of costs. Your business owners, your application owners, those are the ones that are going to be justifying those trade-offs. Can we size this down and sacrifice performance? Do we need to size this up and sacrifice cost? Do we need to deploy this service in another region altogether to service our customers that are in this area? These are the people that are going to be making that justification. They're going to determine whether the trade-offs are worth it. They're going to be, making these presentations up to leadership to ensure that everybody is on the same page. And at the end of the day, they're the ones that are responsible for determining whether it actually makes sense to do so. And then last but certainly not least is going to be your leadership. So these are going to be your executives and your vice presidents. They're going to be the individuals in your organization that track and define KPIs and SLAs. They're the ones that are going to hold people accountable. They're the ones that are going to ensure that as you talk to your customers about any broad changes to the platform, that you know what's going to happen and they know what's going to happen. So once again, we want to ensure, obviously, that your leadership is a part of any discussions and decisions, and they are regularly kept abreast of what's going on from a FinOps perspective. Now, all this is well and good, but let's get into what actually happens and what this actually looks like. And what we're going to be talking about today specifically are FinOps Hubs. So FinOps Hubs are meant to be deployed on Azure. It does use Azure services like Azure Data Explorer and Azure Data Factory and Azure Storage accounts. But once again, because of the Focus standard, I don't want you to think that it's only meant for monitoring and managing Azure costs. Any cloud, including AWS, that leverages the Focus standard can be plugged into an Azure hosted FinOps hub. So really, it is meant to be a set of centralized services that take data from your cost exports. They bring it into a centralized repository such as Power BI or Azure Data Explorer or Microsoft Fabric, and presents that data through dashboards. It is an open standard, once again, through Focus. It's also a publicly available repo that is published by Microsoft in their GitHub environment. and it is meant to be centralized. For those of you that leverage Azure landing zones, and especially enterprise scale landing zones, this would go into something like a management subscription because it is a centralized management function. It is also meant to be scalable, that as additional clouds get built into or bolted onto your FinOps hub, that as your data grows, as your number of subscriptions or accounts grows or things like that, that this will scale with you. And that storage retention, it could be for data processing, things like that. Once again, because we are leveraging Focus, we can get standardized reporting across multiple environments. And the other nice thing is this is made to visualize data in any number of ways. The three that we primarily see, number one is ADX or Azure Data Explorer. So this is if you are familiar with Kusto Query Language or KQL, or you want to leverage more Azure native dashboards, you can certainly do that through ADX. If you are leveraging Power BI as a data visualization platform, there are some native Power BI reports and semantic models that you can plug in. And then for those of you that have already made the jump into Fabric, rather than just standalone Power BI, things like Fabric pipelines and reporting are also available out of the box from Microsoft in their FinOps hubs. And then once again, we already talked about consolidation, so I'm not going to belabor at that point any longer. So let's talk about what a FinOps hub looks like. Number one is we have to get the data out at some point from your environments. These are going to be done through cost management exports. These are going to be exports either from your billing account in AWS or in Azure. But at the end of the day, they need to land in blob storage. Now, which cloud you're exporting from means it's going to look a little bit different. If you're pulling data from Azure, you can export it natively into the Azure storage account that underpins all of these services. It's relatively straightforward. It's really just a configuration in the data export. If you are coming from AWS, AWS will allow you to export data into an S3 bucket. And how you get that data into Azure storage account is up to you. You can use Azure Data Factory, which natively integrates with your S3 storage as a data source. Then with a target sync on the ADF side, you can use a Lambda function on your account if you want to be more event-driven, or if you want to be more of a push than a pull. You can use Azure Functions if you want to do something a little bit more customizable. There's a bunch of different ways that we can get these files, which are generally going to be Parquet format, into Azure Blob storage. But really what we want to do is get them into that storage account and get them into that unified format. Once they land in there, Azure Data Factory is automatically going to trigger to perform ETL jobs to get that data into Azure Data Explorer, which once again is that unified data hub and data storage. From there, we can then do data visualization either through Azure Data Explorer and its native built-in dashboards, or we can actually connect Power BI and Fabric to ADX as a native data source to be able to pull information and visualize through a more user-friendly and administratively friendly platform from a Power BI and Fabric perspective. So to stand up this entire architecture, we generally recommend doing it within about 30 to 60 minutes. Or we generally say that it can be done within 30 to 60 minutes. That's generally going to be without your cost exports. If you've got several hundred subscriptions and hundreds of AWS accounts that all need to be configured, we do recognize that does generally take a little bit more time unless you automate that process. But the hub itself, from the blob storage account all the way to the dashboards, does generally take about 30 to 60 minutes to deploy. For those of you that are kicking the tires in FinOps hubs, the other main question I get is, well, how much is this going to cost? Well, blob storage obviously will be costed based on usage, and the same thing for Data Factory, which would generally run about once a day. But Azure Data Explorer, for those of you that have minimal data sets to start with, you can run this on the development tier of ADX, assuming you don't need a service level agreement. And that cost is generally going to be around $80 to $90 to $100 per month. Microsoft's general recommendation for the cost of hubs is about $130 per month, plus $10 for every $1 million of Azure spend that is recorded. Now, Obviously, those numbers will change a little bit based on your environment and how often you want to run some of these reports. But for the overwhelming majority of my customers, that's a pretty easy cost justification to say, hey, we get this visibility, we get anomaly detection, we get this information for a small, almost infinitesimal percentage of what our annual Azure cost is, just by deploying these services. And there are reports that you can run in FinOps Hubs that actually tell you how much your FinOps Hub is costing you if you don't have that data broken out already. So once you can get some great visualization and great information about what your data tracking is actually costing you. When we deploy FinOps Hubs, there's a pretty straightforward process that we recommend you follow. Number one, registering resource providers, especially if you're using least privilege model and you're not an owner, so you can't register resource providers. Making sure you're registering things like Data Explorer, cost exports, things like that. That does become very important as the first step. Number two is security. Do I want this to be publicly accessible? Do I want to enforce private connectivity through everything? Do I want to ensure that only my users on premises can see this data and can get to it? Making sure that you've got that public versus private hub are very important. And then next comes the actual work. So it's deploying the template. Microsoft does provide Bicep and ARM templates. At the time of this webinar, I don't believe that there's a Terraform template out there, but I could be wrong. But really deploying the template, plugging your parameters, getting it deployed, getting it stood up, validating any weird stuff that happens. Really, the bulk of the time is going to happen in the third item there. So that's going to be the storage account. That's going to be Azure Data Explorer. It's going to be a Key Vault. It's going to be a handful of other supporting services as well. Fourth is configuring billing exports per scope. So that is going to be on a per billing account basis, could be on a per subscription basis, could be on an account basis. However you want to configure everybody to export data and get that into your Azure storage account is up to you. Whatever you want to have in scope is up to you. Maybe you only want to pull development to start. Maybe you only want to pull AWS to start. It's really your prerogative, and you can choose what to configure to export that data into the storage account. The thing to keep in mind with that configuration, though, is it's only going to be data going forward. Most of my customers don't want to wait 13 months to gain any visibility into anomalies and year-over-year changes and things like that out of their FinOps hubs. So the other important thing is also backfilling. So that is exporting data or exporting historical data out of your environment and ensuring that gets imported into your FinOps hub as well. A lot of the customers that I talk to forget about that backfill step, and they really don't see any value in any visibility into their environment because they don't have anything historical to go off of. And it takes a week, a month, a year to really start to leverage those hubs because they don't really have any of the important pieces like anomaly detection, which is obviously dependent on you having historical data. So definitely don't forget to backfill your data into the environment. The Microsoft documentation for FinOps Hubs has all of these procedures documented as well, at least from an Azure perspective. And why are we doing this? Number one, we want to look at trends over time. We want to see how things are adjusting month over month and year over year. The FinOps Hub, by default, when you configure it, is set to retain data for 13 months. That is configurable. If you want to go back 2 years, if you want to go back 9 months, it's really up to you. But the important thing is understanding that we want to get these trends over time. We don't just want to look at a point in time export. We don't just want to look at a point in time configuration or cost report. We really want to see how things are trending. Is my cost staying flat? Am I going up year over year? If my annual rate of change in data is 5%, are my costs going up 5% every year? That's really up to you to determine what you want from a trending perspective. And then also being able to break that down. What is AWS versus Azure costing me? How much are my VMs versus my S3 versus my Lambda versus Glue versus Azure Data Factory? What are those costing me on a given basis? Especially if you're multi-cloud, this becomes really interesting to look at when you can say, okay, let's take two like services like storage accounts and S3 buckets. what are they costing me? What's the comparison between the two? And why is S3 more expensive, or why is ADF more expensive than Glue? Whatever that looks like. That becomes some really interesting data points that you can then go back to your organization with. Is the US costing me more than my EU presence? Is this account costing more than that subscription? Being able to break down and get that visibility is exceedingly important. And then obviously the anomaly tracking and detection. Why am I seeing this spike from yesterday or a couple hours ago, depending on your data refresh frequencies and things like that. That does become exceedingly important. And then finally, obviously being able to charge things back. Being able to pull KPIs, being able to look at your things like your effective savings rates, being able to show and charge your individual teams and owners for their applications is all enabled by these hubs and by the data that it surfaces. Speaking of surface data, let's talk a little bit about the difference between ADX and Power BI. So I mentioned before, from a data visualization and visibility perspective, we really have two options. One is going to be ADX, and the other one's going to be Power BI/Fabric, which are once again more of Fabric being more the unified platform. In Azure Data Explorer, you're going to see things like cost summary. You're going to see more anomaly detection. You're going to see some recommendations on rate and workload optimization. You're going to get information on chargeback. It really starts to become sort of that area from an operational perspective. What's going on in the environment. Power BI does also give you things like cost summary. It also gives you some optimization, also gives you some chargeback. In addition, it can get you some additional visibility into invoicing, optimization of workloads, as I mentioned before, some self-service access if you break down these semantic models and it reports by group. So it's a little bit more user-friendly in that instance. These are not mutually exclusive, by the way. There may be instances where you want Azure Data Explorer to be deployed. There may be instances where you want Power BI, or you can absolutely do both of them. For a lot of my customers, I generally recommend you deploy both of them and figure out which one you like more and which one makes the most sense for you as an organization. But it is important to keep in mind that these are two different platforms. They do look different, they do behave different, they do operate differently, and people leverage them in different mechanisms. But one of the things that we always do talk about in terms of these dashboards and in terms of these reports, as I've mentioned before, is tagging, chargeback, and visibility. For those of you who aren't familiar with them, tags are metadata key value pairs, or in some instances just keys, that get associated to resources that give you more information about how they're deployed. Things like a SDLC environment, or an application owner, or a business criticality, or even a budget. All of these things can be tagged to your services. And a lot of the customers that I talk to don't have a tagging and a chargeback strategy. So the important thing to keep in mind as you're talking about tagging is, number one, set a standard. Choose which tags need to be enforced for which services. Does everybody need a cost center, or an owning team, or an owner email address, or that environment? That does become important in setting that standard and then enforcing that standard using native cloud tooling. In Azure, that would be Azure Policy, for example, so that when people deploy new services, they literally have to do it. They literally have to tag it, and if they don't, that deployment fails. So do make sure that not only do you have a business policy, you also have a technical control to make sure that your users and administrators are deploying what they should be. Schedule your chargeback reports. If you don't want other departments to know, or other owners, or whatever, cost centers, things like that, to know what is being spent in other areas, you can enable services like row-level security to make sure that everything is tightened down and only available to those that need to be able to see it. And then finally, take that effective savings rate. Make sure you set that as a formal KPI. Report on it regularly. Depending on the rate of change in your environment, that could be every month, that could be every quarter. I have some of my customers that actually report on it every 6 months or so, just because they are not always purchasing new reservations. And especially with the term of reservations and savings plans generally being 1 to 3 years, you may not see a major change in your ESR. Make sure you evaluate that and you come up with a time frame that makes sense when you first deploy your FinOps hubs, and absolutely add that as something that is reviewed regularly. We talked a lot about optimization and automation. So number one is triage your anomalies quickly. Have some sort of anomaly detection, whether that is a proactive email, whether that's a reactive scan of your anomaly dashboard. Make sure you triage them quickly. You don't want something to spiral out of control, because that is a very easy way to be forced into a resume generating event. If you have an anomaly that your budget of $100 on a service has been exceeded and now you're at $150, don't just let it go and hope that it's going to stop at 150, because there is a good chance, depending on when your budgetary cycle starts, that the next alert you're going to see is going to be for $300 or $500 or $1,000 or things like that. So make sure you're triaging those anomalies. Make sure you've got those eyes on glass. Make sure you're really optimizing, operationalizing your environment, and set your automations as such that you can do automated remediation. Maybe you want to cap the number of units that your services scale to. Maybe you want to automatically shut down other non-core services if you do see a spike. Make sure you have those automations set appropriately. Be very careful about it. We do generally recommend having some sort of human in the loop for those automations as well. But once again, having that is very important. Advisor and Power BI and ADX recommendations are also easily found. Make sure you're acting on them. Look for things like unattached disks. Make sure that you're purchasing those reservations. Make sure you're right-sizing those workloads that are idle, or you're upsizing and optimizing services that are running super hot. Make sure you're taking a look and act on those. Add those into your operational cadence. The other thing to keep in mind is that as you purchase reservations and as you purchase savings plans, they do expire. Whether you purchase a 1 or a 3-year term, it is going to come up eventually. 1 year down the road, who knows what your environment's going to look like? Who knows? Or 3 years down the road, who knows what your environment's going to look like? Make sure that as your reservations and your savings plans are coming due, that you are evaluating them. Does this application still need to be around? Is this still sized appropriately? Are there do I want to switch from a reservation to something that is more flexible, like a savings plan? Or is everything dialed in nicely enough that I can switch from a savings plan into a reservation? Maybe I've got a service that is covered by a savings plan, but now I want to apply a reservation to it to get a little bit more savings and get a little bit more juice out of it. All these things need to be rebalanced on a regular basis. At the very least, when these commitments do expire. And then finally, we talked a little bit about automatic remediation, Azure Functions, Logic Apps, auto-scaling policies, Azure Monitor. All these are tools that you can use to not only alert, but remediate the environment if something were to go horribly, horribly wrong. And then we'll talk a little bit about best practices here. Number one, stand it up fast, get it out there, start to gain data, start to build rapport, start to show value in the service. You can certainly customize it later. It doesn't have to be perfect before you publish it out. The dashboards that come out of the box are pretty darn good for what it's worth. So don't hesitate to just get it deployed and get everything out there. Bring it to your data teams, give it to your Power BI team later. They can do their own customizations. As you get more familiar with the focus data set, you can choose to exfil additional data and extract additional data, but at least get something out there. The most important step is the first one, and the second most important step is the one after that. So you always want to make sure that you are moving forward and getting these things deployed, and that goes into that crawl, walk, run mentality. Gain that visibility, establish your KPIs, and then start to look at automation. In terms of that automated remediation. The hubs are meant to be enablers. Give people access to them. Allow them to make decisions. Allow them to infer their own information out of it. Use that as a centralized tool that multiple teams can use to justify and right-size their environments. And the easiest way to do that, once again, is to have that unified data standard and unified schema, which is where focus comes in. Leverage focus where you can. If you want to pull in other clouds and you have to do like true ETL, you can, but absolutely implement leverage focus where you can. Once again, it's being adopted pretty widely. So it's something that is pretty widely available. Going at a higher level and expanding out on the implementation, we talked a little bit about crawl, walk, run. Just to go through this really quickly, because we are fast approaching time. Get the hub stood up, get the Azure resources out there, get your data in there. Once again, don't forget to backfill. That is, once again, extremely important. Baseline those dashboards, get an idea of what's exposed, get an idea of what is reported on. Start to make little tweaks and things like that. You can start to develop a backlog, whatever that looks like. Start to establish Azure policy or some sort of tagging policy. Make sure that you've got cost centers, GL codes, whatever that is, exposed somewhere, and start doing at least show back, if not charge back, to your teams and to your groups. And then finally expand, automate. Modify those dashboards, bring in additional clouds, deploy your Azure functions, your Lambdas or things like that. Really start to operationalize the environment and operationalize your finances within the cloud. So from there, hopefully this has been a lot of great information for you. You've learned something a little new that maybe you didn't know about FinOps or FinOps Hubs. But what can you, as a person who's watching this webinar, do next? What do we generally recommend? And this is going to follow a lot of things I just mentioned. Number one, deploy the hub. First step, get it out there, get it deployed, start gathering data, start exporting data and bringing it into ADX and into Fabric. Number two, start leveraging those dashboards. Start implementing the basic ones that are included out of the box, start making changes to them, but at least start getting dashboarding out there. Number three, get a tagging standard. Make sure that you know what's out there and who owns it and why it's out there and when it was deployed and things like that. Make sure you've got those tags deployed in your environments. Once again, that data gets surfaced in FinOps Hubs and your reports. It becomes much easier to report on it if you've got that out there. And then finally, for those of you that are on ADX or Power BI, we do recommend evaluating Fabric for this as well. The main reason being that Fabric has a lot of these ETL and data storage processes built into it. So rather than rolling your own storage account, rather than rolling your own Azure Data Factory engine and pipelines, you can do this as a unified configuration in an Azure Fabric capacity. Obviously, Microsoft is making a lot of advancements in Fabric as well. So we see that as sort of the first party solution from a data visualization perspective. And really, if you want to get into more specifics with us, once again, we are Netrix Global, and I'm Tom Lilly as your field CTO for Cloud Solutions. If you do need a hand on any of these things, we are more than happy to help, whether it is an assessment of your landing zone or the well-architected framework, whether it is a deep dive into Azure cost analysis, whether it's the implementation of FinOps Hubs, whether you want to have broader discussions about data estates and data lakes and Fabric in general, or Azure Data Lake Store, or Glacier, or anything along those lines across your clouds, we're happy to discuss data lakes and what that looks like long term, as well as data visualization. Once again, into tools like ADX or Power BI. We have full cloud infrastructure and endpoint teams, application development, application modernization, and data and artificial intelligence teams that we are more than welcome to bring to bear on any of these conversations, whether it's around FinOps or whether it's around the cloud in general. We have a ton of experts that are willing and ready, willing, and able to help out. If you do want to talk about any of these topics, please feel free to reach out to us at info@netrixllc.com. You can go to our website at netrixglobal.com/let's talk and fill out a form. If you're an existing customer, glad to have you. Please feel free to reach out to your account executive who can schedule time with myself or another person to further these conversations. But with that, I want to thank everybody for your time today. Once again, if you need anything else, please feel free to reach out, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.